Well, welcome to this very special live stream called The Future of Emergency Services. We're delighted that you could be here. My name is Wayne Clark from the World Class Manager team, and we've got a very, very special guest lined up for this very extra special live stream. This is kind of away from a topic that we cover in the sense of we've not yet had an expert from the world of policing talk about some of the best practices, insights, data, views, macroeconomic changes, and what all of that means for the future of emergency services. So we're delighted to have a very special guest called John Sutherland with us this morning, or this afternoon, or this evening, depending on where you are. So a quick bit of housekeeping before we start. If this is the first time that you've joined one of the live streams, then a massive welcome to you. Thank you very much for being here. If you're a returning guest to the live stream, then thank you very much for being here again. The format is quite straightforward. We get an expert to talk about insights, best practices, tools, tips that we've learned from the world of leadership and management. And in this context, we're going to look at policing and also the world of, in a way, post-policing and being an author, and we're going to get into that. And then we're going to get into some Q&A and some thoughts and discussions. So please feel free to use the chat function that you've got access to. We're being streamed live on Facebook, on YouTube, on LinkedIn, and something else. So whichever one you're using, please feel free to use the chat function, submit a question. We've also got Ashley from our team live on the line who can pick up some of these questions, and we can pose those to John either as we go through the session or at the end of the session. This is a very relaxed affair. Business casual is needed. It's not too formal, and we're going to get into some of this discussion as well. Also to say that this is, for us, an important topic because we understand that there are, we've got people in, significant roles that are doing the most important work, arguably, in society, where there's all sorts of challenges going on here. So I think this is a really important session to unpack some of that and look at some of the parallels to business, to management, to leadership, and also for us individually of how we lead and manage teams. And one other quick thing before we start, I had an opportunity to spend 8 hours in the back of a police response car in London, which is where we are based at the moment. And let me tell you, it was the most remarkable, most thrilling, most petrifying in some cases, just most sort of rewarding, unbelievable experience to get a sense of what people are facing day in, day out, the weight of pressure on the emergency services I got to experience firsthand. And I came away from that day with the most profound, I guess, feeling towards how the police are doing their important work. I know there's lots of stuff in the press, good stuff and bad stuff, but all I got to experience for the 8 hours was something exceptional. So again, it was a personal first-hand experience of witnessing some of the most, remarkable people doing the most remarkable things for 8 hours straight. And it was quite a mind-blowing experience. So if you can do something like that, I thoroughly recommend it. Or even if you don't know much about the police force or your local police force, depending on where you are in the world, I do recommend it's worth learning some more because it taught me a lot, and a lot about leadership and a lot about great management, which of course is why we're here. So without further ado, I want to introduce a very special man called John Sutherland. John Sutherland spent 25 years in the Metropolitan Police in a very senior role as what we call in the UK a chief superintendent, which is a very senior police role, and then left the police about 8 years ago to become an author, and has authored 2 books, one called The Castle and one called Blue, a memoir. I actually have something on screen that I'm going to show here. Why not? So one book is called The Castle. This is John's new book, and the previous book he wrote was called Blue, a memoir. So again, really urge you to take a look at those, both available on Amazon. We are conscious it's Christmas coming up. They can be great gifts for everyone you know and love. Without further ado, I want to introduce John Sutherland. Now the cringy book plug is done, and you didn't ask me to do it. I decided to do it because I think they're awesome books. But anyway, welcome. Thank you so much, John, for being here.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And I'm not here to sell books. I'm here to talk to you.
That's it. Perfect. And I think in the run-up to the discussion today, we did have a call and we talked in a sort of wide-ranging way about some of the issues and some of the challenges and things that we should get into as part of this. So, we've got a semi-structure here. And then also, as we get into this, if you've got any questions, do feel free to jump in. Also, where are you? So for those of you who are dialed in, connected in, where are you? Shout out your city, your company, your team. Give yourself a shout out. Just drop it into the chat and this will come up on the screen. So again, a massive welcome to you. So John, without further ado, let's get into some of these questions. And I'd love maybe if you could go through, maybe you can unpack a little bit more about your rich history. I'm conscious that I covered this in like 15 seconds, an entire lifetime of work you've done. So maybe before we get into the first question, maybe you could give us a bit of a précis overview of your background and your story, your journey.
Oh goodness, I've taken my glasses off now because they were reflecting on the screen. It means I can't see you, but I can hear you. And
Probably better for you.
there's not much to tell. I'm a husband to one. I'm a dad to three. I'm a resident of South London, and as you said in the introduction, for more than 25 years, it was my extraordinary privilege to serve as an officer in the Met Police. I joined in late 1992 as a constable, as pretty much everyone in UK policing does. You start on the ground floor, out on patrol, answering calls. And over the next 20 or so years, I worked my way steadily up through the ranks to become, as you said, a chief superintendent, which gave me command of one of the London boroughs, initially Camden in North London, latterly Southwark in South London. And it was, and it is, the best job in the world. I'm always at pains to point out that I'm not a blind apologist for policing. I don't think we should ever shy away from its very evident failings. But I also know what I saw over the course of 25 years. I know who I worked alongside for those 25 years. And I would say without hesitation that most of those people, most of the time, were about as extraordinary as people can be.
Yeah, for sure. And just out of interest, given sometimes in these live streams we talk about people's journey, career journey, inflection moments where things changed or things opened up. And I was quite interested, this wasn't a question I asked you before. You studied human geography, and then and was the plan to enter into policing? What happened between studying human geography and then joining the Met?
Well, those who know anything about geography know that basically I got a degree in colouring in. And that was never going to lead me to any great heights. And no, to be honest, apart from a brief and entirely unfulfilled hankering to be a pop star, policing was all I ever wanted to do from the age of about 16 or 17. And I remember the first moment it occurred to me. It literally was a moment in time. I was standing on Hammersmith Broadway in West London waiting for the bus to school. And I saw a police officer walking towards me on the opposite side of the road, or walking in my direction. He wasn't paying any attention to me. And there was nothing at all going on. He was just strolling at 7:30 in the morning, and knowing what I know now, he was probably bored and cold and tired and hungry on his way into the local station for breakfast. But while I wouldn't want to give it the full sort of Damascus Road experience, that definitely in that moment something went click inside me, and really from that moment onwards I never really seriously considered anything else.
I mean, it's such a blessing in a way, because for many of the leaders that we interact with and talk to, and we've probably worked with now more than 1,000 different CEOs, and we've done some specific looking at what is it that makes people, fundamentally successful in whatever walk of life that they go into, because we've worked across all these different professions. There is something important about clarity of what you want, and not many people get there. So, I had this great quote. It says, human beings are really hard workers, but they're really bad askers. They're quite bad at being clear about what it is. And my mum is 71 years old. She sort of jokes, she doesn't know what she wants to do when she grows up. But being clear about what you want, I think, is a huge component to success, because if you're not clear, it's really hard to be able to galvanize your effort in a particular direction.
I mean, that's a really good point. I mean, I was incredibly fortunate that really I had that moment in time, and then I had the opportunity to pursue it. I mean, if you were to ask most good police officers, and I'm specific in the wording good police officers, why they joined, they would say very simply that it's because they wanted to help people. Yeah. And the fact that that's a well-worn phrase doesn't make it any less true. And I suppose looking back at my 16, 17-year-old self on Hammersmith Broadway, I don't know whether my thoughts and dreams and aspirations were that well formed, but absolutely, looking back now over the course of my career, that's what it was. It was the ability to help to make a difference in the world. Because actually, when you strip away all of the noise, the job of a police officer is to save lives. It's to find lost children. It's to protect vulnerable adults. It's to step into harm's way in defense of complete strangers, sometimes to risk it all. And put in those terms, it really is an extraordinary job.
Yeah. So today was, or this morning actually, is quite topical given this discussion, because it was announced for the latest news from the IMF suggests that of the G7 countries, the UK, and I know not everyone tuned in is from the UK, but for the UK, we're going to experience one of the highest inflation rates this year and next year, which puts, again, more added pressure, as well as all the current pressure on our finances. And therefore, what does that mean? Which, for most walks of life, means that things will be tighter and more difficult. So funding for public services, importantly for emergency services, it has always been challenged, and it will always be challenged. So given all of these constraints on the public purse, and one thing you mentioned before, and I love the terminology about having, what's the adult conversation that you think we need to have now about the emergency services, and specifically with policing?
It's such an important question. I'd say in this country, in the UK, we've sort of been in this place now for about 15 years. So we had a coalition government come into power in 2010. And over the next 8 years, we went through a period of unprecedented austerity in the delivery of frontline public services. From 2010 to 18, the government cut 44,000 officers and staff from policing in England and Wales. And as I was mentioning to you in our conversation last week, it wasn't just the numbers that we lost, it was also the experience that we lost. Policing is one of those jobs that you learn by doing. And we lost hundreds, thousands of years of policing experience. But it wasn't just the numbers and the experience. We also lost the relationships with local communities. One of the first things to go during that period of austerity was the framework of neighborhood policing, community policing, that had been built up over the previous decade, and that was and remains the bedrock of everything good about policing in this country. So from 2010 to 18, we had this period of austerity that was devastating for policing and for frontline public services in general. And after a period of respite, we're facing up to some very similar economic realities now, as you point out. And so this is where I come to the need for old-fashioned, grown-up, honest conversations. And two things in particular that I think we need to be able to talk about, articulate, listen to one another about. Number one, what is it that we actually want the police to be? And number two, what is it that we want the police to do? Because the recurring refrain, and not just in policing for the last 15 years, has been to do more with less. But the reality actually sometimes is that all you get with less is less. But in the meantime, we've continued to demand everything of policing. We've continued to ask that they do all of it and more of it. And that's not just within the core policing mission, because as I said, austerity have affected every other part of public service delivery, whether that's in adult social care or children's services, youth services, education. Everywhere has been short of resources. Everywhere has been trying to do more, or at least the same with less. And often what has happened in the last 15 years is that policing, in addition to its day job, has been asked to pick up the pieces that other services have left behind. I would go so far as to say that these are the most challenging times for policing in this country since the end of the Second World War. And that's not hyperbole, that's not exaggeration for effect. I'm not hoping someone's going to clip this and tweet it and quote me on it. It's just a simple statement of fact. I don't think in any of our lifetimes we have seen a set of circumstances as challenging as this for policing. So we need to have these grown-up conversations. What do we want the police to be? What do we want them to do? Because they can't be all of it and do all of it.
And I'm interested then, as we went through, or as you went through a first-hand experience with Austerity One, I mean, did you feel tangibly the impact of that in terms of, you're on the front line with your teams, what did you feel as you went through that?
Every single day you felt it.
Right.
And with sort of growing intensity over time. So 2010, at the start of austerity, I was the borough commander for Camden in North London. Later on, as I say, Southwark in South London. And every day we were facing resourcing decisions. And it's in the nature of a good police officer to want to help everybody. Yeah. But we began to be in a world, really for the first time in my career, where we weren't able to help everybody, because we simply didn't have the numbers or the resources to take every call, or to give every caller the level of care we might have wanted to. And so you're faced with some pretty tough decisions as a manager, as a leader. Every crime matters to every victim, understandably so, rightly so. But I got to the point where I had to be willing to say publicly and to my own people that there are some crimes that have to matter more. Yeah. Domestic violence has to matter more than low-level criminal damage. Youth violence, gang violence, knife crime has to matter more than theft of a radio from a car. Any crime that has a child or a vulnerable adult as its victim has to matter more than one that doesn't. And you have to start making operational decisions based on those realities. Yeah. But inevitably, that means you're going to let some people down. And that doesn't sit well with good coppers.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I got to experience, when I went on the ride-along, there was a call that we attended, and there was a lady who had harmed herself. And it was, I'd never experienced anything like that before. I got there as we all arrived there, and I think we got there probably 15 to 20 minutes before the ambulance were available to turn up. So in the meantime, there was another sergeant who was just masterful, John, the way that he was engaging with this young lady, talking with her, being so personable, supporting her as she'd gone through this quite harrowing moment. He was also a trained medic, so he managed to, and interestingly, when the paramedics arrived, they realized, how good he was and how trained he was, and they sort of supported him as he was in the midst of this sort of moment. And then we had a small debrief with him afterwards. And I didn't ask him the question, I asked somebody else in the team the question, but how does he cope with that? Because I found that really harrowing, partly the situation, and also the fact it was a young lady. I have daughters. I'm sort of thinking this is horrible for any human being to go through. And how do you sort of how do you de-gas or de-stress after this moment? And then someone said to me, you must understand, Wayne, this is like layer upon layer, years on years of this stuff. And I just, how do you cope with that? I mean, this is obviously you've been through 25 years of this, but how do you cope with that? I mean, we're talking business about resilience, about well-being, and how do you cope with that level of stress?
Gosh, such an important question, such a powerful question. So I tend to tell stories more than I quote statistics, but I will give you one statistic. So in terms of the exposure to extreme trauma of the kind you're describing, it's reckoned that most of us in our ordinary lives, however you define those, but most of us in our ordinary lives are exposed to extreme trauma on maybe 3 to 4 occasions, which is 3 to 4 times too many, but such is the nature of life. But police officers, and indeed paramedics, during their operational careers are exposed to extreme trauma 400 to 600 times.
Right.
So that's 3 to 4 times in an ordinary life, 400 to 600 times in a police officer's life. And one of the things that I've learned over the years, I was, and if people want to ask questions about this later, I'm very happy to talk about it. I ended my policing career at the 25-year mark because I was medically retired, because I had a fairly major breakdown, not least as a consequence of the things that I'd seen and done over that sort of quarter of a century. And I've realized that it would be impossible, not unlikely, not improbable, it would be impossible to do the job of a police officer for any length of time and to remain unaffected by the things that you see and the things that you do. And so leaders in policing in particular, but in every walk of life, we need to be hugely cognizant of the consequences for our people of the demands that we're placing on them. And in policing, that can be, I guess, particularly dramatically obvious if you're turning up to murder scenes or fatal road accidents or cot deaths or whatever today's catastrophe happens to be. But life and work can take its toll. And I think, given the economic pressure we're under, given the political pressure we're under, given the armchair scrutiny that we're under from keyboard warriors and everyone else, it's more important than ever to be looking after our people. Yeah. And when I joined policing in the early 1990s, nobody was talking about the mental health of the workforce, despite the fact that we were dealing with the realities of mental health operationally on the streets every day. Cases of exactly the kind you're describing. But we never talked about our own mental health. We never talked about the cost and the consequences of our work on us as individuals. And we're at a point now where people are having that conversation, and where there is a much more open recognition and understanding of the nature of the job. But we've still got a long way to go. Yeah. Because at the end of the day, sorry.
No, I could see when we were in the car, the interplay and the conversation between the sergeant and the borough commander. Obviously, they've got a good relationship, but it was just what's the word I could use to describe it? It was hugely supportive. I mean, you could tell the interplay between the two of them. Like, should something arrive for the sergeant, he wants to talk about it. That would have been an open channel of discussion. So I guess the manager, in the typical sense of an organization, the manager-employee relationship, from what I observed, was really strong. And I would suspect, even though they're going to probably go through similar harrowing things, the level of support in that relationship is, in a way, baked in, and probably they would both fare a bit better had they not had such a good relationship. And again, I guess it's heavily dependent on the quality of the relationship you've got with your manager or leader, whoever you report to, and whether that individual ultimately cares about you, because that's something you can't really govern for. You can train for it partly, but it's hard to train that.
Yeah, it's a really astute observation. I mean, at its best, and again, I'm very cognizant of what happens at its worst, but at its best, policing is a family, and those connections, those relationships, are profoundly important. Whenever well-being comes up in conversation, I still often find that it's regarded by many as a side issue. That it's, if you understand what I mean by the phrase, it's a bit beanbaggy. It's a bit sort of fluffy. It's for people who do lots of thinking and not lots of doing. It's a bit niche. And for those of us who are operationally getting on with the job, it's not something we've got time for. And that perspective just could not be more wrong. Whether you call it well-being, there's got to be a better word out there somewhere. I've yet to come up with it, but it's absolutely fundamental to the ability of our people to do the job that we're employing them to do. It's the old Richard Branson thing about, if you take care of your people, they take care of business. I think that's as true in policing as it is in any other walk of life. And yet so often we seem to forget that. Our people just become links in a chain, commodities. No. They're people, and people are precious. And I often find myself reflecting on a quote I came across from an unnamed American general. So this is no use to any of you, because I genuinely don't know his name. But when he was asked for the secret to great leadership, his response was, drink more coffee.
Right.
And it took me a moment to kind of cotton on to what he was saying. I mean, I can't stand the stuff. I don't drink coffee at all. But actually, whether it's coffee or something else, that's irrelevant. His point was the secret to great leadership is to spend time with your people.
Yeah.
Whether it's over a cup of coffee or for police officers, a cooked breakfast at 8 o'clock in the morning, but meetings without agendas where we're not trying to do anything other than get to know and understand one another better and well. Because the better I know you, the better I'm going to be able to work with you. The more you know me, the more you're going to be able to trust me as your boss. And the better that relationship and the connection that we have, the better the outcome in whatever working environment we happen to find ourselves in.
And one of the things, again, compounding this challenge of being able to spend more time, have deeper conversations, is the sort of the natural increase in the frenetic pace of life and everything else. And I'm involved with a couple of the different business schools, and it was one of the course lecturers that I meet with quite regularly. And I saw her it was a Friday afternoon, early afternoon, and she looked totally exhausted. And I'm like, obviously your week's been pretty tough. Are you okay? And she said, no, I'm not actually. She said she just had like a few nasty emails from students that had submitted their essays at 9 in the morning on Friday morning, and they were on her case by lunchtime to ask what the result was. And she's like, are you joking? But she's dealing with a group of 19, 20-year-olds who want everything immediate. And not just 19, 20-year-olds. We all want something immediate, right? So I think that there is this ratcheting up of the pace of things, and therefore also the expectations of people. And I wonder, given certainly in policing and maybe across the wider emergency services, I guess we're not immune from that, right? You're not immune from that. In terms of people's increasing public expectations and demand just keep getting ratcheted up.
Absolutely. We live in the age of impatience. Culturally and politically, we are hugely, overwhelmingly impatient in relation to just about everything. We want our food faster. We want our broadband connection faster. We want our Uber cab to turn up faster and faster and faster we go. And just it's so terribly bad for us. And in whatever walk of life, under pressure of time, and it seems to me that time is actually becoming almost the rarest and most precious commodity of them all.
It is, for sure.
And I think those of us who end up being most successful will be those of us who end up learning how to best use our time. We get confused between the important and the urgent. We get overtaken by what I call the tyranny of the inbox. And we lose our way. And a phrase I often use when I'm doing sort of leadership presentations, I talk about the busy, dizzy people. And I don't know about you, there was a game that used to be played in my student days where you would take a broom handle, rest it on the floor, and then you'd rest your forehead on the top of the broom handle, and you'd have to spin round and round in circles before then performing some task, usually involving alcohol, but not always. Right. And inevitably, people just fell over, and we all fell about laughing, and it was good fun. But actually, that has come for me to be a metaphor for how so many of us spend our working lives as the busy, dizzy people. We are so overwhelmed that we're like the person with their forehead on the broom handle, spinning round and round and round in circles, expending huge volumes of energy and effort, and making absolutely no forward progress whatsoever.
And the analogy I see with that, so every day in London, I live in London as well. I mean, every day in London, I sort of see it more and more with driving. I see this most insane acts of not necessarily, I guess it's like the precursor to road rage, but it's like this aggressive form of driving, like, trying to get one place in front, and you kind of think you can see in front of you there's another 2 miles of traffic, but it's just but it's the mindset though, isn't it? It's I've got to try and get somewhere faster. It's it's there.
As another phrase I love, doing the wrong thing faster won't get the right thing done.
I like that. Yeah, very good. So in terms of your I guess the parallels between what you've experienced in your 25 years in policing and then I guess what you've been through in your sort of change of career as an author. I'm interested in what you've learned in that period now, sort of bringing us up to 2025 and John's world. What would have been some of your key insights on sort of leadership? Because I'm aware over the last 8 years, you've had probably much more interaction with the world of business and looking at the applicability or transferable nature of what you'd experienced in policing into the world of business, and how applicable has that been?
Well, so I mean, the short headline answer is that it turns out that a huge volume of my policing experience is immediately transferable to the outside world. So, for example, I spent a number of years alongside my day job working as a hostage and crisis negotiator. And some of the basic communication skills developed in that role are entirely directly applicable in the world outside. Indeed, are entirely directly applicable to the glorious privilege of raising teenage daughters. But in every walk of life, the skills you learn as a hostage negotiator are the skills that you can apply wherever you end up. So there is an immediate transferability. And I think sometimes police officers, because we don't end up with lots of kind of garlands and certificates and rosettes and qualifications, sometimes police officers fail to appreciate actually just what an extraordinary skill set they possess and how marketable and transferable those skills are. But one of the things I learned most clearly stepping out of policing and into the world beyond and stepping away from the broom handle. I mean, I remember one day, I was still the borough commander at Camden at the time, and the police station was 13 stories high, and my office was on the top floor, so it was a kind of glorious view of London and its surrounds. But I remember stopping in the corridor. I almost had the literal ping of the light bulb over my head. We were well into the age of austerity. We had demands coming at us from every side. You know, crime was up, demand was up. I mean, just everything. And I was that busy, dizzy person. And I just had this light bulb moment. I said out loud, I can't remember who I was talking to, but I said, I've stopped thinking. I was so overwhelmed with the doing that I'd stopped thinking. And one of the things that retirement afforded me was the time and the space to think and to actually try to understand why things are the way they are, and actually try to understand what we might better do to mend them. So whether you're talking about a particular crime problem or whatever the challenge is in the walk of life that you come from. But I think one of the consequences of that scarcity of time is that we lose the capacity to think. And when we lose the capacity to think, we're almost certainly going to end up going wrong.
Yeah, and you're on autopilot at that point, at best.
Or you're in survival mode.
Yeah, absolutely. And we see this all the time in companies, right? So you look at, we cover 24 modules in our manager program. Module number 4 is called optimizing time, and it's by far the most well-regarded and most utilized part of our program. And the promise of that particular module is essentially to help you get some of your time back. Now, obviously, you can't get time back, but what you can do is start to figure out how to use time more effectively, because absolutely, as you say, it's the most precious commodity anybody's got right now, and is becoming more and more precious. One of the things that we ask managers to do is to try and build in perhaps, half, if possible, like half a day a week. And the response to that would usually be, well, there's no way I can spend half a day a week sitting and thinking because I'm so busy. And you say, well, probably in the next few weeks that is true, but I suspect your diary from January or February next year will be much less busy than it is in October or November. So maybe you could diarize that time and keep it sacrosanct, as you would do going to the gym or the doctors or something. So there is that element of it. And then the $1 million question then we also ask is, well, what would you do with that time? And often that one is not really quite clear. But in order to spend that time rethinking what's going on, and you think, going back to your original point, about the adult conversation. I mean, this is in the parallels here talking about the world of business. I mean, this is the exact conversation too, because how many leadership teams, because they're so busy, actually spend time rethinking, you know, let's say I employ 1,000 managers in the organization. When does the organization stop, take a sit down and think, hold on, we've got 1,000 people in management roles here. This is, you know, this is October 2025. What should the role of the manager be going forward? You know, most organizations don't have this. It's a very simple conversation to have. It doesn't even take that long. But how many people are conscious of it and actually rethink it? Not many, actually, because exactly as you say, busy is a truth, and people are fundamentally, you know, exhausted all the time, overwhelmed. One of the words I often remark, I don't know if this translates internationally, but it's certainly something I observe more in the UK, is the word of manic. And it's often seen as a good thing. I was in a lift at a bank we work with, and I watched two guys get into the lift, and one's like, "How you doing?" And the other one said, "Oh, I'm manic at the moment." The other one went, "Yeah." And it was kind of like, what would the result have been if he'd have said, "How you doing?" And the other one said, "Well, actually, I'm going to take half a day out just to think about what's going on with the bank and the strategy." And the other one would have been like, "Have you lost your mind? What's wrong with you?" But manic was often, in that moment, was seen as like a good thing, because but you think of the word, it's manic, it's a mania, it's insane, isn't it? In a way, it's absolute insanity. But it sort of pervades modern life. So I guess from a management and leadership point of view, again, I'm interested for like how do you try and counteract that? Because you're never going to stop, like the emergency services challenge of resources and doing more with less, or more with the same, which is less. You know, you're never going to stop that like weight of pressure and demand, because that's always going to be there. And then sort of as a manager, you sort of have to block it and somehow create a space where it doesn't feel so insane for the people in your team. You know, how do you manage to do that?
Gosh, we're covering some ground here, aren't we? And some big stuff. I mean, just initially on that point of you need to take some time out to think, and the response being, "I can't, I'm too busy." And I recognize my own failings in this as I look back over my career. But I would almost turn it on its head, and I would say to people, well, one of the reasons you're too busy is because you haven't taken the time to think. And you know, whether it's half a day or half an hour, but that investment of time, you know, if you want a sporting metaphor, you know, just to stop and put your foot on the ball and have a look at the whole field of play before you make your next pass. It's I'm sure there will be better analogies and metaphors than that one, but I think you get the point. We end up too much of the time busy with the wrong things. Actually end up doing stuff that doesn't really get us to where we want to go, and in some cases actually can do precisely the opposite. And one of the biggest reasons why that happens is because we haven't taken the time just to pause and draw breath. And it doesn't have to be half a day every week, and it doesn't have to be on your own in a solitary room. You know, I do some of my best thinking in the company of someone like you, where we've both just taken half an hour out of our days, and we both switched the phones off and left the diaries outside the door, and just one or both of us can just bring something we're struggling with, and then one or both of us can help the other person work it through. But just that time to think is so precious. But the rewards potentially are so significant that when someone says, "I can't afford to take the time," my response would be, well, you can't afford not to.
Yeah, absolutely.
In terms of a specific policing context, I mean, it is like living in the eye of a permanent tornado, because you've got the operational demand coming from the streets, and you know, when you're a police officer, the calls don't stop coming. You've got the organizational demand coming from the bosses above, but from the workers below, all of whom want a piece of you. You've got the political demand coming from politicians both locally and nationally. You've got the media scrutiny, which in the case of policing is often pretty hostile. And then you've got the sort of the broader social media scrutiny from the people in possession only of an armchair and an ill-informed opinion, and all of it, all of the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And somehow,
Insane.
as a police officer, whether you're a PC on the front line who is having camera phones shoved in their face anytime they intervene, or you're the commissioner or the chief constable or whoever, somehow you've got to find a way in the midst of that to hold your nerve, to retain the courage of your convictions, but also your professional experience, not to be swayed by politics or agendas of every kind. And as a policing boss, my job was to create the space for my people to get on and do their jobs to the very best of their ability.
Yeah.
And on my better days, I hope I was able to do that.
Yeah. I'm sure you were. I'm sure you were. I'm conscious of the time, John, because we've got, I didn't realize the time. We've got some great questions apparently that are sitting, waiting for you.
I need my glasses for this
yeah.
bit.
So we're going to see these questions the same time. Here we go. Where we go. Jennifer Jurgensen, I totally agree with what you're saying. How do you cope with or manage the reality that on one hand, you have to prioritize calls to crime, but it's so critical to drink more coffee? It's also the reality of the leaders I support. How can I best support them given this reality? What a brilliant question, Jennifer. Thank you.
Oh, Jennifer, this is like sitting all of my university exams all over again, trying to answer these questions. That's brilliant. I want to give the question the answer it deserves. I mean, at a slightly basic, almost trite level, you have got to be prepared to practice what you preach. And so for me, and there's an element of stubbornness required in this. So in my walk of life, as a senior police officer, like everybody else, to some extent, you are governed by the diary. If it's not in the diary, it isn't happening. So I would have to, some way in advance, make sure that there was space blocked out in the diary. And so for me, it would be a combination of trying to go out on patrol with my officers when I could, and also just space to, I mean, quite literally, in fact, walk the floors, whether that's sitting down in the canteen with officers and having that literal cup of coffee, or whether it's walking through the CID office and talking to the detectives. But you've actually got to be stubborn and insistent in blocking out that time. Because I think in the end, it is one of the most important things that you can do. Visible leadership is so important. And then there's just practical stuff. In both places where I was the borough commander, I had multiple police stations that I was responsible for, and various other council offices where some of my officers were working, that sort of thing. When I had a meeting somewhere else, I would either walk in full uniform or I would go on a police issue bicycle. And that just gave you a bit of visibility, but also I would take a radio with me. And if a call came out and I was nearby, I would answer it, and I'd go and join my officers in answering it. So you've got, I'm not sure whether this is an adequate enough answer to your brilliant question, but you've got to be really intentional about it, and you've actually got to be a bit stubborn about it. And when people come back to you and say, no, I need to put something else in there, you say, no, you don't, because this is what matters to me. And over time, people will start to get the message.
Brilliant answer. Thank you so much, John. And Ash, I'm not sure if you've got any more questions there, but if you do, here we go. A question from Jennifer Bryan. What did you do when you realized you had stopped thinking? I think a lot of leaders are feeling this. Brilliant question. Thank you. Again, another Jennifer. It's a Jennifer onslaught of questions. Brilliant.
Excellent. We could all do with more Jennifers in our lives. Yeah, again, really good question, and actually not a dissimilar answer to the one I've just given. In terms of, okay, it's about, so after the realization, you've got to kind of diagnose the problem. So what are the reasons why I've stopped thinking? Can I do anything at the sort of supply end to modify that? But having done the diagnosis, then you've got to come up with the treatment. And so much of that is going back to being intentional and saying, I need to carve out that bit of time. I need my half an hour a week with Wayne over another cup of coffee, just so I've got somewhere to let all of this out. Because we're all human beings. We're not machines. And much as the machines might be trying to take over the world from us, you know, as long as we're around, we need to hold on to our humanity. We need to hold on to what makes us beautiful and extraordinary. And so much of that is about connection, human connection and communication. And so I try to spend a bit of time every day thinking rather than doing.
And I think that the challenge for many leaders, it depends where you are in a sense in the hierarchy, that and often the more senior you become, the more in control you become of your time. So for those, you know, we often deal with, and we're working with thousands of managers that are in sort of sandwich positions with, you know, big teams as well as large numbers of stakeholders that are pounding them all the time with requests. And often, you know, as we've experienced with leadership team members, they all blame the manager. It's always the manager. If the managers just did their job, then we'd sell more, we'd, you know, deliver better customer experiences, all that stuff. So I think the managers are sandwiched in a way in a difficult position. Yeah, really
and so if I, as you know, as the big boss, if I recognize that this is important to me, I need to recognize that it's important for my people. And it's up to me, therefore, to foster, create, nurture an environment where not only I've got a bit of time to think, but everybody else has too. Where I'm displaying as a leader that this is something I actually value, rather than, you know, that time, whether we measure it in half hours or whatever, I'm explicit in regarding it as an investment, not a cost.
Yeah. And it's one of the things that often, you know, you sort of bake in or isn't baked into the operating rhythm of most organizations. Even if you look at a leadership team and say, how often does the leadership team get together and think together about these important questions that face the organization, whatever type of organization it is? Most are quite infrequent, actually. And there's one organization that we talk about a lot, and it's a hotelier. I always talk about them. They have one of the best employee engagement scores, probably the best customer feedback scores of any organization I've ever come across. They're exceptional. But if I look at the operating rhythm of the leadership team, every Monday morning, all of the general managers get together, whether that's virtually or in person, and they talk about what happened the last week. They talk about the next week. The frequency is weekly to do that and they, you know, they employ 2,500 people in 20 different properties in 7 countries or something. It's quite remarkable, but not many leadership teams get together that frequently. And even if they do, what do they actually talk about? Often they follow a process of a board pack or a menu of items on a meeting agenda, which don't often get to some of the most fundamental elephants in the room that exist in the organization.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's as much about culture as it is about function. You know, whether I'm at the top and setting the culture, or whether I'm somewhere in the middle and contributing to it, what is the atmosphere, the environment that I want? I'm going to be intentional about creating. What kind of place do I want to be working in? And what kind of place do I want my people to be working in? So I think it's hugely about culture. In all of my management meetings, I made an automatic change to all of the agendas, so that the first item on every agenda was simply entitled "Good News." And before we got into any of the business, we'd just go around the room and from any source, anyone could just tell us a story of something great that had happened that day or that week or since we'd last met. And it wasn't always successful, but broadly speaking, it set the tone for the kind of culture that I wanted to create, that was about celebrating all that was brilliant about what police officers do every single day.
So no, Jennifer, we've got a question here from Tim Whitmarsh. If there was one thing you could have changed but was never able to, what would it have been? I think interesting question. What would the impact have been on the officers you line managed and yourself? Oh, great question, Tim. Thank you.
Tim, I'm going to call you Jennifer anyway.
It's a new world.
That exactly. It's such a good question, and actually, I would struggle to limit it to just one answer, but I'll give you the one that immediately came into my head. So again, now when I'm back talking with policing audiences, and particularly when I'm talking about leadership stuff, one of the slides I put up on it just has the heading, "The Meaning of Courage." And the extraordinary thing about policing is I never had to walk more than 10 paces in any direction to come across the most extraordinary examples of physical courage. I'm the kind of stuff that would make your eyes water and take your breath away. I mean, just, yeah, I mean, I could spend the next 10 years telling you stories of the people I worked with and the things that they did. Physical courage was never hard to find in policing, but sometimes moral courage was harder, more difficult. Police officers, and I include myself in this, who wouldn't necessarily think twice about running into a burning building or diving into the middle of a barroom brawl or whatever it might have been, would suddenly come over coy and hesitant at the prospect of having a difficult conversation with a colleague, or even more so with a boss. And that's not brave. And there were occasions during my career where I shied away from doing the right thing because I lacked the courage. And I think we see evidence of that in policing and in other organizations, where finally some horror story, and most obvious in my mind so often is the murder of Sarah Everard. And I refuse to use the name of the man who killed her, but a serving police officer. How many people knew, if not what he was going to do, what kind of person he was, and how many people left him unchallenged along the way? And if that's an extreme example of a man who kidnapped, raped, and murdered, I think there are examples all the way along the sliding scale of, actually, Wayne's just said something that I'm really not comfortable with, or John's just given an order that I'm really not happy about, but I'm just going to keep my head down because putting my head up might be career limiting, or it might make me unpopular, or at the very least, it's going to make me feel uncomfortable. And so, Tim, Jennifer's question, if there's one thing I could have changed, it's that I would have been braver, and that I would have allowed people around me to be braver.
My gosh. What a beautifully generous and honest answer, Tim. John, that's absolutely brilliant. Thank you. And I think the parallels there also for many of our teams, organizations are so true to what you say, the bravery to be able to have those courageous conversations. And if I could maybe just finish with a little bit of our data, because we've surveyed 15,500 managers from our process this year. And one of the things that we've just been sharing is that 47% of managers said that they were fearful of giving any feedback whatsoever. And interestingly, when you dig into that 47%, and we looked at what types of conversations people find the most frightening, that they do not want to engage with, it's conversations about behavior. Behavior-based conversations are things that most people, and it's not to do with age or generation, most people do not want to engage in that for fear of what the repercussions might be. But I think, in line with what you were saying, it's really, really powerful. I am notified by the team that we've got more questions, but perhaps we can ask you to answer those maybe on the live chat on LinkedIn, because I don't think we're going to have enough time to get into all of the questions. But I mean, what a testament to you that we've got so many wonderful questions. And just a huge thank you, John, in terms of just so generous and open with your feedback and your insights and your learnings. It's a real gift to be able to spend the time with you, learn from you, as I'm sure for many others have experienced in the live stream. So a huge thank you.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
And hopefully we can get you enticed to get back on another one next year in 26. That'd be awesome. Again, a huge thank you to John. Huge thank you to everyone who's dialed in and connected in. I think we've got multiple countries around the world in the live stream right now. And a huge thank you to both Jennifer's and also Tim for sharing your brilliant questions. And we look forward to engaging with you in future live stream sessions. Thanks so much. See you again.